everyone, my name is Priya, and in today's video I'm going to be doing the surreal portrait using acrylic paints. So like any other painting, I start off with a concept sketch and I just get the idea out on paper and try to figure out how I want the final piece to look in my mind, but I bring it out in graphite on paper just so that I have the proportions right and I have an accurate drawing or sketch that I can work with. So I started with working on this piece with the a reference photo of a portrait, and then I started adding in all the different elements around. So it's very important at this stage to have a accurate drawing, because this is what I'm going to use for the final piece, and this is what I'm going to use for as a guide when I'm doing my painting. So I'm just adding in all the different elements. I wanted something that's going to be very mystical and magical and more fantasy like and also a bit surreal. So I wanted to create something that has a variety of different elements in it, but also has this gentle softness to it. So I started working on the sketch, and it's been something I've been wanting to do for a long time. But because I don't usually work on portraits that often, I wanted to just give it a try and see if it's going to turn out good or not. I wasn't sure what the final result would be. Obviously I did make changes as I did the drawings and the process of the painting. There were some changes made, but for most part I stuck with the initial sketch. So now you can see I've just measured my wooden panel that I'm using for this painting, and I just decided to sketch or trace the entire image onto some tracing paper, which I'm then going to use some transfer paper to transfer it onto the final wooden panel. So there as well, if I made any changes, it was done while I was transferring the image. So once I had it transferred or traced out, I then used some transfer paper to transfer the image. Now I did try to use the dark graphite transfer paper for the image transfer, but it wasn't showing very well on the wood. So I decided to change that and redo it again and use the white transfer paper, because the white transfer paper showed a lot much clearer on the wood panel than the black or the darker gray transfer paper. So I went in and I transferred the entire image again onto the wooden panel, and then I sealed in the image with some clear gesso. Now I usually a lot of the image is going to get covered up when I'm working with the acrylics because they are opaque and they cover up, but it's just that I am going to use the guide of the sketch to guide me through the entire piece. However, I did notice that once I added the clear gesso, I did get a bit more texture to the wooden panel. The wooden panel alone as it was very smooth, and I usually work on very smooth surfaces, so it did get a bit of texture once I added the clear gesso. So I did sand down the entire wood panel, and it became smoother, but it still had a bit of that texture to it. The clear gesso that I used was a bit more textured than the normal white gesso that I would use to prime my canvas or my wood. So that's just something to bear in mind if you're using clear gesso. I don't know if all of them are like that or if it's only this particular brand that I've used, but it was not a problem because it actually it worked to my advantage. I thought I was a bit worried that it's going to be a bit of an issue because it's going to have I'm going to have difficulty getting smooth blends and details, but that wasn't the case. I was still able to get a lot of details. As I said, I did sand down the entire panel before starting to paint, and also having some of that texture still on the canvas or on the wooden panel, I was able to create this dry brush effect for the paint, which you will see later in the video, which I think was a nice touch to the final piece. So I started working on the face and adding a bit of skin tone and also adding some details to the eyes, as well as working on her hair. So you can see now I'm starting to add some shadows, and then I decided to initially I was going to leave her hair light, and then I decided to darken it and make it a bit of a darker brown. So you can see me building up the layers of the hair and then adding more shadows and details to the face. Now you'll see me moving around as I paint because it's for various reasons. One, I'm waiting for certain areas to dry, and two, it's also I want to see the entire painting. I want to see how I want to develop it and how I feel it, in which direction it's going to go. And certain areas, if I have a bit of color, it gives me a better idea of what I'm trying to achieve and how I'm going to get to that point. So I worked on the eyes, and her eyes were very bright and blue, so I wanted to retain that, so I kept that magical blue, light blue eyes that she has. And then I started refining the face and adding the shadows and the highlights, and also warming the tone of the skin on the face. Now you'll see some places I'm using my finger to blend. It's just because it gave me a better blend than using the brushes. For most of this painting, I'm using round brushes of various sizes. I believe I did use a Filbert here and there for certain areas, but for most part I use round brushes. And you can see I'm just now adding some details to her hair, and adding more layers of brown paint. But I'm trying to retain the colors and retain some of those tones of the hair of the underpainting that I've done. So you can see I just started warming up the skin, and then I started adding some of those little details for the little dots on her face. And then she also has these flowers in her hair and this little headpiece that she's got on as well. And over her face, from her nose down, she's got this little veil, transparent veil covering her face. That was not in the reference photo that I was using. The reference photo was just a person's face, but I wanted to create that little veil over her nose and mouth. As I said, I want to create this mystical, magical feel. So I started adding in the little flowers for that part of the veil, and then I added some details or some of the background for her face, because I realized I need to have her face complete before I put on the rest of the details of that little veil that's covering her face. And then I added a bit of the background for the hair, and also started defining her lips and her chin. Now the lips were looking terrible with that color, and I just went over it with the skin tone, and then started adding a bit more color and shadows to the rest of the face. And then I went in with a lighter pink, and then I also added a little more details for the mouth, just to create a bit more dimension, and to make the mouth and the lips look a bit more realistic, and also look more natural. So also added a bit of the shine to the lips as well. And then I started working on that little details for the little veil that's over her face. So I'm not actually sure what that is called. I'm just calling it a little veil because it's only covering over part of her face. And yeah, like I said, I wanted it to be more magical and mystical. And at this stage, I started working on the base layers for the doves that are around her. And I also started adding more details to the headpiece that she's got on her head, and just started refining some of that. I also started working on the base colors for the hummingbirds, which I decided to go with a turquoise and a pink. And then I started adding a bit of the background. Now the background is going to change a lot. Initially I started with this light blue background. Then I started adding in just where all the flowers are going to go, and the leaves and the branches of the flowers, or the stems of the flowers. And then I started working on the background, adding colors and different tones to the background. And actually I'm going to lose a lot of that purple and pink that I added, because I didn't like how it looked. But I did try different things, and some of it worked, some of it didn't. But what I liked of this part was having that dry brush effect of the paint, and showing the painterliness of the painting. And that was something that I enjoyed. I did add this green around her, and I didn't like it at all. When I went into this painting, I thought it's going to be a green sort of a look. That's why I painted the edges of the canvas green, but then I decided to change it and keep it more turquoise, blue and teal and white. So I kept it very light because I wanted it to be a very light piece. And yeah, so I went over a lot of that background with the blue and turquoise colors and teal, just to cover over those other initial colors that I put on, the pinks and the purples. And I am going to cover over that green as well. I didn't like it as well, so I covered over that as I was working. So yeah, now I started defining and really refining those flowers, and adding shadows and details to the flowers, and also working on the background around her portrait. So you can see me adding a lot of blues, a lot of turquoise, some white, and I'm keeping that dry brush look on certain areas, which I think really helps to make the image look a bit more magical. And then also I'm working on the doves in between, and the hummingbirds, and adding more layers to them. Now at this point I wasn't sure how to make it look a bit more magical, so I just tried out adding a bit of flowers here and there, and then adding little strokes of brush strokes of white paint around it, and it really those little dots of paint all around, it really gave it more of a fantasy, a magical feel and a surreal feel. And I think added a bit more brighter greens to brighten up those stems of the flowers and the leaves. And then I also started adding a bit more color to the hummingbirds. I didn't want the hummingbirds to stand out too much. I wanted them just to be in the background, but the birds were just there to add to the background and to the environment or to the area around the portrait. And then I also added a lot more layers around the entire piece to create this sort of light feeling and a happy, calm sort of and feeling that you feel emotions of calmness and relaxation when you look at this piece. The edges, I repainted it with some blue and turquoise, but I let some of that green show through underneath just to create a more distressed sort of a look. And I think that really goes well with the final piece and what I decided to go with the color themes that I used for, or the color theme that I used for this piece. So now is when I just look at the final piece and start adding those final details and look at what's missing, or if there's some areas need a bit more shadows or some more details. It's at the stage that I decide upon that, and then I start refining certain things. Like I said, there's certain things that need to be corrected, or anything I do it at this stage. And yeah, I kept some of that initial layers of background, or the background still showing through, because I wanted to create that depth. But at the same time, I want to create that, retain that brush strokes and that texture of the canvas as well, or the paint brush strokes showing through that dry brush look, and I want to retain that. So yeah, I think that's it for this video. This was a fun painting and I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, don't forget to like and share. Feel free to comment below, and don't forget to subscribe. Till the next one, bye.